David Cobb, good to see you on this Friday morning. Dusty May and his staff have turned transfer bigs into first-round picks in consecutive years with Danny Wolf and at least a Daimara. Is JP Estrella, is he going to be the first? I mean, the next. And by first, I mean next.
Yes, it's crazy because Tennessee's last game of the season, JP Estrella's last game as a volunteer, came against these Michigan Wolverines. And I'm going to venture to guess it wasn't his performance in that game that switched the light bulb on for Michigan staff. I'm going to guess they had already done their advanced work on JP Estrella before that meeting, because if that game was all you're going off of and you're a Michigan fan and you're like, wait, that guy, that's the one we're bringing in to replace this convoy of bigs, I'd be a little underwhelmed. But if you look at the body of work, GP, I actually think JP Estrella compares pretty nicely to Marez Johnson Jr. in the way he plays, right? Because you look at Yaxel, you look at Marez, you look at Adai Mara, you're like, all right, which of these players does JP Estrella profile the most closely to? It definitely is not Yaxel. Definitely not Yaxel. And I don't think it's Adai Mara either, because JP Estrella has not shown that elite like paint protection sort of ability. Now, granted, a lot of times he was playing next to Felix Okpara at Tennessee, and Okpara was that elite rim protector. So JP Estrella was more off the ball in terms of being, he wasn't always defending the fives. He wasn't always the last line of defense there at the rim. But if you look at their offensive profiles, JP Estrella, 60% field goal shooter on post-ups, according to Synergy. That's pretty comparable to Marez Johnson Jr., 56.4% on post-ups, according to Synergy. And then at the rim, I think is where there's a little bit of a difference. Tennessee fans would tell you that JP Estrella was a little disappointing at times at the rim against some of the bigger opponents on Tennessee's schedule. He still shot a very respectable 60% at the rim, but Marez, almost 72% at the rim. So a little bit of a difference there, but JP Estrella is a really solid. 5 years ago, he would have been a 5, no questions asked, right? But in the way it's going now, the way Michigan likes to play, the way college basketball is structured, he's more of that 4 or 5. And assuming Michigan's going to play next season the way it played this past season, yeah, like you could start JP Estrella at the 4 and play more of that bully ball smash mouth style.
It seems like exactly what they did last year, which is identify role players from power conference programs that they can envision being something more. Like they hit it across the board with those guys. I know Yaxel wasn't a role player, but he was a star at UAB in the American. But Elliot Cadeau was a guy at North Carolina. Marez Johnson was a guy at Illinois. Adai Mara was a guy at UCLA. None of them the guys at those schools. And yet they collectively came together to create undeniably the best basketball team in the country. And here's another example of them, I think, going down a similar path. He only averaged, JP Estrella, 10 points and 5.4 rebounds, but that comes in just 18.3 minutes per game. So the per minute stuff is actually pretty impressive. And so you're exactly right. They didn't make this. The transfer portal doesn't open. And then Dusty May's like, so, hey guys, congrats again on the national championship. What are we doing about next year? Like this was in the works, and then they executed it and got it done same way they did consistently last offseason in the transfer portal. And so I guess my next question for you is, does this tell us something about what the roster will look like next season in Ann Arbor? As you know, Yaxel Lindenborg is gone. He has exhausted his eligibility. That's the easy one. The more difficult ones are Adai Mara and Marez Johnson Jr. because they are both. Mara, I think at this point is almost a lock to be a first-round pick. It's do you want him in the lottery or do you want him 20? But he's going to be picked somewhere. And I think most people assume, and it's just an assumption, but assume he will be in the 2026 NBA draft. Marez Johnson, it's like you can look at one mock draft and he's 23. You can look at another one, he might be 36, right? And those are the type of prospects in this era of the sport where you can make a lot of money in college basketball. I can totally understand why, if your options, your realistic options are maybe be picked in the 30s, maybe split time between an NBA franchise and a G League franchise. And even when you are in an NBA uniform, you're probably sitting at the end of the bench and making whatever you're making. You could make more money than that being a star college basketball player, charter flights, nice hotels. and you're on national TV every game. You're in sold out arenas basically every game. I can understand why you would say, I'll just come back to college then. So as always, I'll let these young men make their own decisions with the guidance of their families and agents. But I do have Michigan number one, and we'll perhaps keep them there no matter what these decisions are. But my current roster projection in the top 25 and 1 has Yaxel gone, Adai gone, Mo Johnson back with Elliot Cadeau, LJ Kaysen, and Trey McKinney, giving Michigan 4 real rotation players back. Does this development, should I change that? If you were doing the top 25 and 1, would you say this commitment makes me assume they must think Morez Johnson is actually out the door?
Well, if Morez Johnson and Adai Mara are both gone and JP Estrella is like the guy down low for Michigan, I think you got to look at maybe moving them down. I don't think that's going to be the case. Now, could Morez Johnson and Adai Mara both go? Yes. And if that happens, then I think Michigan's in the market for a big who might even be better than JP Estrella. Now, JP Estrella ranks 21st in our CBS Sports 24/7 Sports transfer portal ranking. So he's among the more highly rated bigs so far in the portal. But you can't do what you did last year in terms of dominating teams on the interior if JP Estrella is the focal point of your front court. He doesn't have the length, the wingspan to have you the number 1 ranked defense at KenPom like Michigan had this past season. So if you get one of those guys back, I feel like JP Estrella is a really nice complementary piece to them. But if both of them leave, then you're back in the market for another big-time stud. And then not to mention, like, how do you replace Yaxel? Because he was sort of the third member of that towering trio, but he played on the perimeter. They cast him more as a 3. Who is that guy in the portal this year? I don't see him yet. You know what I mean? Yaxel was 1 of 1 last year in terms of that archetype. So they're going to have to kind of shift and mold this thing a little bit because the guards you mentioned, Cadeau, McKinney, Kaysen, you know, they aren't that 6'9" sort of versatile Dominican LeBron archetype. So there's still some molding and shifting to be done here for Michigan, but it's very, very early. And just because guys aren't in the portal right now doesn't mean they won't be. And there's somebody out there maybe who could play that role for Michigan. They could still hit the portal. You know, this thing is going to be open now for a handful more days.
Well, that's the thing. And I'm not saying this about Michigan specifically, but Michigan as a brand, Michigan as a program, that is the type of place that can put people in the portal. In other words, there's a lot of different ways basketball players end up there. Sometimes it's because they're in search of more money. Sometimes it's because they're in search of more playing time. Sometimes it's because they got pushed there by their current staff. Sometimes it's because they got a phone call and said, hey, if you're happy, be happy where you're at. But, you know, if you got in that transfer portal, we could maybe make an offer that would convince you that you're not as happy at your current place as you thought you were. So Michigan is the type of, like Michigan, Duke, these big brands with big, you know, budgets. They're the types that can have somebody pick up the phone, get in touch with somebody and say, is your 6'8" wing at this place happy? Yeah, he's fine. Okay, but like, is he really happy? Could he be happier at this other thing? If so, you know, get him in there and we'll get him right out of there. So that's the type of thing that could go on as well. But either way, it does look like almost regardless of what happens between now and the beginning of next season, we will, heading into it, have very reasonable and realistic conversations about, yeah, just like we thought UConn had a chance to go back-to-back and then three-peat, and just like we thought this season, Florida on paper looked like a team good enough to go back-to-back, we're going to head into next season, push back if you want, almost regardless of what happens between now and the opening day, thinking that Michigan's going to have at least a shot to be a back-to-back national champion. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and then don't forget too. I mean, their actual high school recruiting class is highly ranked. I mean, they've got a kid, 6'10" kid coming in who's a top 50 prospect. I mean, he could play minutes for him in the front court too. Right. Now, that's not something we saw from Michigan this past season. We didn't see true freshman contributors for the Wolverines on any significant level whatsoever. I mean, that could change this next year if they've nailed these evaluations on a very, very highly ranked freshman class. So that's the other element to to remember here. They don't have as many spots to fill as you might think because they do have a nice freshman class coming in as well.